I'm Rae Strickland, and I am currently a professor of English here at Manchester Community College, and I'm also a member of the class of 1977.
Mm-hmm. Good. I was going to ask you about that because your history with this college goes back, what is that, almost 40 years? No, 30 years. 40 years? 30, 77, 87, 97, 7. 35 years, close to it anyway.
I wasn't a math major.
So was I. That's all right. Bob Kagan asked one of the people, what year did you come? And she was dumbfounded. She didn't know what to say. Let's start with your student experience before we migrate to your work history, which is varied.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Well, mid-70s, pretty wild time in general, and MCC was kind of the same. Had really great experiences here. But I would say one thing that I feel is different between now and my relationships I have with my students now than when I was here is that my professors treated me much more like a peer and an equal, and it was great. So I can remember being, I was editor of Shapes, the literary magazine, and I was sitting in a beanbag chair in Clemwell Young's office, reading manuscripts or something, and John Gustafson came into the doorway and was making jokes, and he saw me scribbling there in the corner, and he made some, I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but he made some joke about Emily Dickinson, and I, it was funny, and of course I laughed, but I just felt like this is so great that I, understand the joke, and it just seemed like very glamorous to me in a way, like that this wonderful, I don't know, exchange, Yeah. And I guess in some ways you could say it had its maybe downsides in a way, in that first time I ever smoked marijuana, I was in a male faculty member's car. And then we went into the Hartford Road Cafe, where the rest of the class was. But it was it was sociology, and we were talking about social justice and all kinds of stuff like that. And I can't say I didn't regard the professor as a friend or an equal or anything like that, but he was definitely, I definitely thought of the professor, whatever the discipline was, as being the expert. But they interacted with us in a way after class that I don't have. I wouldn't do nowadays with our students. It's just times have changed. It would be inappropriate. And, of course, the drinking age was 18 then, too. So it was okay for me to be in a bar after class having a beer with my classmates.
We'll get back to this in a second, but is this your first choice, and why? I mean, you were a good student academically at Manchester High?
Yes, I was a good student. I had, and I had actually been accepted to Trinity, and I was supposed to go there, but to be honest, I managed to apply and get accepted without ever setting foot on the campus. And when I actually went there, I felt very, very out of place and self-conscious. My background was such that, for instance, I was reading the catalog, and it talked about graduate classes and undergraduate classes, and I didn't know what that meant. What was a graduate class and what was an undergraduate class? And when I got there, I asked my advisor, what does that mean? And the advisor told me, but I felt like, that's a question you're not supposed to ask. And that pretty much, my whole experience at Trinity was kind of like that, of feeling like I was supposed to already know that. Right. And so anyway, when it was time to actually go, I got cold feet, decided I didn't want to go. I was going to go, I got a job working in a donut shop, spent the summer there. There was a boyfriend involved that I two, so I wasn't actually going to go to college at all. But then, like right after Labor Day or before Labor Day, one of my friends at the donut shop said, I'm going to go sign up for some classes at MCC. Come with me. When I finish signing up, we'll go to the beach. I said, great. So I went with her, and we stood in line, and the line was like literally 4 hours long. So by the time we got to the front line, I said, screw it, I'm signing up too.
Put in this time.
Yeah, I put in this amount of time, I might as well take classes. So I just signed up for the same classes she was taking. And it was cheap enough then. I just kind of wrote a check, and that's how I got started. But I discovered that all the things that I didn't like about high school went away. I really enjoyed my classes, my professors, the interaction with other students. And I'm still friends with some of the people that I took classes with at MCC.
Yeah.
So that's really amazing. Yeah.
Talk about Clem Will Young.
Well, Clem was a professor of English. She taught poetry writing and was in charge of the poetry circuit to bring visiting poets on campus. And she was the faculty advisor to the literary magazine. So I first met her by taking her class, and she was one of those professors that when class was over, she'd say, hey, everybody come to my house and we'll continue. So we'd all hop in our cars and drive out to her house, and we'd read our poetry and talk, and it just had a great time. And I just stayed in touch with her, and she really mentored me. She told me what graduate school was and suggested where I should go. And
Right hand.
yeah, exactly.
Was she responsible for your interest in writing, or were you already predisposed?
I was already writing when I came to MCC, but I was kind of, I guess, a closet writer in a way. I had published a few things in my high school magazines and things like that, but I had never taken a writing class and had to share my writing with other people and be critiqued and all that. So it was definitely a different experience for me.
Clem can put you at ease very quickly. And I just was thinking about the bonfires she used to have, and corn. She'd cook corn on these out in a field somewhere. It was insane, but that's nice. Are there any other faculty at that time, or friends or people that stand out in your mind as a student? I'm talking about.
Yes, I had Marsh Elmore for film study class, and that made a big impression on me. And I had. My mind just went blank, but you'll be able to film Tom, who was a New York policeman.
Oh, Connors.
Connors, yes, Tom Connors, for sociology. And he took us on a bus trip to New York City where we went to all the different neighborhoods. So he just drove us in. He said, okay, this is Chinatown. You got half an hour or 45 minutes. And we'd get out and we'd just walk around and try the food and see everything. Then we went to Little Italy, and we went to all the different ethnic neighborhoods, and that was just a fabulous, Saturday in New York. I had John Crowley for anthropology, and I had John Jacobs. Yeah.
John Jacobs. Yeah.
Yes, for philosophy. Yeah. That was interesting because he was very old school. He was very different from the rest of the teachers I had who were, as I said, it was the 70s. So, we'd come in and sit on the floor cross-legged. Well, not quite. I'm exaggerating, of course. And Professor Jacobson was very old school. We weren't even allowed to ask questions. He just lectured. You took notes, and even asking a question was disrespectful.
Now you graduated in '77. Then why don't you talk about the gap before you returned to the college? You left here, and
yes, right after I graduated. I went to Bard College in New York, where I majored in creative writing and literature. and spent 2 years there, and also kind of losing words, Chuck. What do we call that? Commuting, sorry. Commuting back and forth because I had a job at Hartford Stage Company on weekends, so I'd come in the box office, so I'd come back and forth for that. And then when I finished there, I got a job in a theater in Richmond, Virginia for a year, also in the box office. And while I was there, talked to Clem Young and said, I'm thinking I should go to graduate school. Where should I go? And she recommended the University of Iowa. So I applied there and went there to do creative writing in their graduate program. So now I'm up to 1983.
Roughly that.
Yeah. And by that point I was married, and my husband, Paul, got a job at the Indiana University's theater department, and we were all set. We had rented a house. He was going to make $10,000 a year, so I was all set. I was going to be catapulted into middle class. I was just going to stay home and write. And and so we were moving on Tuesday, and on Saturday they called and said that they had violated a hiring procedure at the university. So instead of moving to Indiana, we actually ended up coming back to Connecticut, and I went back to working at Hartford Stage full-time in the development office, and did that till 1987 when I saw an ad for a part-time job at Manchester Community College. And I wasn't really sure. I was at kind of a crossroads. Should I go do a doctorate or look into something else. But I thought, well, this would be a nice interim job. It was a temporary job. And I applied for it and got the job. It was supposed to go March to July. I thought that'll be perfect. And then and then they just couldn't get rid of me. So in July the job was extended because my boss, whose name was Chuck Please, was on sabbatical. So they needed somebody to just kind of man the office, or woman the office, I should say, for the summer. And while I was there, I wrote a report, just on my own motivation. And I always tell my students, I think it's true, that because I took that initiative and wrote a report, that I landed a full-time job, which eventually turned into first grants writing, and then public relations afterwards. So I always encourage my students that you see, writing is important, even if you're not hired to write. So,
talk about any interesting experiences there. What obligations do you have in general with those jobs?
Well,
I
guess
30th I'm thinking about. But,
yeah. Okay.
Wine
Yeah.
auction and all those
Yeah. The 30th anniversary is one of my favorite memories. I had a ball doing it, though I was a nervous wreck beforehand. Candy Tatro and I were working with you, and the way I remember it, you were definitely the big vision idea person, and I always remember we first approached a room full of faculty members and said, wouldn't you like to get involved in this? Wouldn't this be a great thing? And morale wasn't that great at the time. Yeah. And I actually remember somebody saying, this stinks. So there was not a lot of buy-in from the faculty. But you were undaunted, and you said, well, we're going to do it anyway. We'll go out to the community. And so we started making tons of appointments to go visit people. And we'd go in, and you'd say things like, there's going to be hot air balloons and antique cars. And Candy and I were like, take note, hot air balloons. Where do we get those? Antique cars. Pony rides. Okay. But, of course, then community people came on board. And then the staff, faculty and staff came on board and started saying, I still remember the day that Jack Parker came in and said, do you like antique cars? I can get you some antique cars. We can have a car show. And it was like, oh, thank goodness, because that's on our list, and we don't, So it all started really falling together. And
it was one. It was one amazing team between you and Candy for organization and detail and keeping me on task and not wandering off into La La Land. I mean, that was a remarkable team, I thought.
Yeah, it did all come together.
Yeah.
I remember it was a 2-day event, and the first day was the antique car show, and then we had a band on the band shell, local band, very popular, the Nifty 50s band. And I was just a nervous wreck, and I think I was probably chiding you a bit. But that day, everything was going great, and I found you up on the hill talking to President Dalby. And
this is a true story.
This is a true story. I said, Chuck, I know that I just, so many times I said, this is never going to work out. This is never going to work out. But it's really turning out great. It's really, you were right. It's really great. And then I said to President Dalby, it wouldn't be politically incorrect for me to hug my boss, would it? And he said, oh, sure, and hugged me. And I said, oh, I meant Chuck. I was so taken aback. No, I meant Chuck.
Any of the other projects, because you were involved with a ton of them. The wine auction, I think, was a big project.
Mm-hmm. Every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think my biggest challenge, two big challenges come up to me. One was when we had a TB, somebody tested positive for TB, and I think it was a slow news week, and all of a sudden we had all these cameras on campus, and people got a little panicked, and there were long lines for having TB inoculations and all that, and that was kind of crazy. And
that's when you were in PR.
I was in public relations, yeah. And I just remember at one point the news crew putting me on TV to talk about the symptoms of tuberculosis, and I just felt like this is ridiculous, but there I am.
I know what a graduate student is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not airborne. You'd have to have somebody cough directly on you. And all that. So that was one, and then of course the other was when there was a vote of no confidence against the president, and trying to. I just remember picking up the Hartford Courant. Again, I was in public relations, and my dream was always that someday, we would have a story above the fold on the Hartford Courant. And I'm picking up the paper one day, and there's Jonathan Dalby's face above the fold on the Hartford Courant with the news about and just feeling my stomach go, ugh. Because I think that it really didn't affect business at the school at all in terms of the students. That the students were totally unaffected by it, and I wanted to make sure that message kept getting out. That okay, so we have our problems here, but this is a great institution, and great education is happening here every day, and the students really aren't affected by it. I know after I came to work here, I found out. That sounds funny, but. That the president, while I was a student here, had a lot of problems with Denison, and as a student, I was totally unaware. So it's interesting that the role of the president is so important, and yet at the same time, yes.
Now you left that area.
Public relations.
Yeah. Well, and the whole development office, and then what? Or did I miss a piece?
Well, In 1991, we had a budget crisis, and I was on a year-to-year contract, and my contract was not renewed. So I took a job at Cheney Hall in Manchester for a year, which was a good experience. But when there was an opening here, I applied and was able to come back. So in 1993, I came back. So I missed a year in there, and I was in development for a couple of years, and then in public relations, and eventually that morphed into enrollment management for a year. At which point, there were a lot of retirements, and there was a possibility of applying for my dream job, which was teaching.
Sure.
And I have been teaching part-time in the English department since 1987. So luckily, I realized ahead of time that these retirements were coming up. So I kind of scoped out what the English department needed and really just prepared myself for what they needed and for the interview, and just promised myself that, when I walked into that interview room, I was going to be the most drop-dead gorgeous candidate that had ever come down the pike. I'm really happy that I was successful.
Now, how long have you been teaching? Full-time?
Since 1998, full-time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So close to 14 years, coming up 13 years or so.
Wow.
11, 12.
Amazing. Yeah.
Want to comment on people or experiences that you've had at the college, either as a student or as an employee? Excuse me. Individuals that stand out that in your work field, generally.
Okay. Well, I have to say Candy Tatro.
Okay.
She and I had an awful lot of fun, but we always got a lot of work done too. And when I look back, I'm amazed at all the things that we pulled off together, often in kind of a crazy fashion. We did a craft show every year. That was really Candy's baby, but I always helped her out with it. And I can remember one year in the old program center, it was always in October, and it always was the weekend when the tail end of a hurricane was hitting. Always, every year. And one year, the program center roof kind of turned into a hose. We were just in there, like, no problem, with buckets and mopping up and smiling, like, oh, yeah.
So you were involved with the Alumni Association as well?
I was involved with the Alumni Association, both as just a member, and then when Candy was on maternity leave, I kind of took over for her for that year and helped run it a little bit. So, yeah, I've been definitely involved in that.
Anybody else, I should say?
Oh, my goodness.
You don't have to. I mean, if there's somebody you want to get a plug in for, do it,
Well, we talked about Clem, who, obviously I have to plug her as somebody who really helped me along. But, they've all been winners.
Now, you have an unusual feature in terms of your doctorate program. Can you talk to that briefly?
Yeah, I went back to do my doctorate in 2002 through a summer program in Durham, England, which allowed me to stay teaching full-time and then go do my coursework in England in the summer and correspond with my advisor and so forth during the year. And I did my research in my classrooms with my students, which was...
So you're now Dr.
Yes,
Strickland.
I am.
That's
yes.
wonderful.
But everybody still calls me Rae.
He's Rae.
Yes.
Is there anything else you would want to add to your story before we bring it to a close?
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your coming.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks.
Thank
It was
you.
lots of fun.
All right.